Alys Rivers is as much a fixture of Harrenhal as its melted parapets and collapsed walls. Mushroom asserts Aemond Targaryen carried on an intimate relationship with her. My friend, Septon Sitwatch, claims Daemon Targaryen had an unnecessarily long, hallucination-filled experience while under her care. But what is she? A witch? An enchantress? Or something else? Something at once mundane and magical, simple and complex, youthful and ancient. Let's find out. I'm Sir Claudrick, chronicler of the Seven Kingdoms, and this is Tavern Truths, Alys Rivers and the Curse of Harrenhal. Now this is where a good chronicler would tell you Alys's birthplace or parentage, or a rough estimate of the years she's lived, and whether she's died at all. But when it comes to Alys Rivers, nothing is for certain, other than she resides at Harrenhal. And she's a wet nurse. So, what is a wet nurse? A wet nurse feeds, cares for, and sometimes raises a child that is not her own. For biological reasons, a woman needs to have been pregnant herself in order to nurse an infant. And yes, by many accounts, Alys Rivers had been pregnant on multiple occasions, though, sadly, none resulted in a successful pregnancy. But what if I told you there was a reason for that? A reason beyond misfortune? A reason that makes more sense than you think? If the stories are to be believed, which I don't think they are, Alys was the illegitimate child of Lord Lionel Strong, and of an age or older than his true-born sons, Harwin and Larys. This would make her in her 40s, yet Maester Muncan and Septon Eustace both report that the woman looked much, much younger. And Mushroom claims that she was not the sibling of, but the wet nurse to Lord Strong's sons, and possibly the wet nurse to Lord Strong himself, making her at least in her 70s or 80s during the Dance of the Dragons. Moreover, the thespian, Lady Rankin, has said that Alys, quote, spent a lot of time figuring out how to be by herself, but that's like a blessing and a curse after 400 years. So, how old is she? And how can she continue to be a wet nurse in any of these proposed scenarios? What indeed is going on with the Bastress of House Strong? Well, I for one do not think she is part of House Strong at all. I think she is the wet nurse to something older and more powerful than any house in the realm. I believe Alys Rivers is the wet nurse to the Curse of Harrenhal. First, we must understand the history of Harrenhal. Named after Harren the Black, ruler of the Iron Islands and the Riverlands in the years prior to Aegon's conquest, who built the largest castle in Westeros as a sign of his power. And in the 40 years and thousands of labourers it took to do so, he cut down an entire grove of weirwood trees, leaving a single heart tree standing. A tree whose facial expression, unsurprisingly, is rather angry. The castle itself stood for less than a day before Aegon the Conqueror came to Westeros, and its residents were nigh moved in when Balerion the Black Dread burned Harrenhal to ruin, killing Harren the Black inside. One thing did not burn, however. One thing was left entirely unscathed: the heart tree. It looks over what used to be its grove, bleeding fresh every spring, as though it remembers. And remember, it does. Since the death of Harren the Black, every house that has ever held Harrenhal has come and gone. Most did not leave whole. Some did not leave at all. But the tree? The heart tree has outlasted every single one of them. Because the heart tree is the only true owner of that land. Be it filled with expressive white trunks or sprawling stone towers, there is but one landlord, a nameless old god passing judgment on its tenants. And who better to care for such property, who better to raise the old god's land as if it were her own, than a wet nurse? If Alys Rivers is indeed far older than she appears, she would have borne witness to all of the tenants and lived through their stays. These tenants can be divided into three categories: those who died on the property, those who died off the property, and those whose place of demise cannot be confirmed. Quentyn Cohaeris, the first post-Harren ruler of Harrenhal, died from falling off his horse. A rather strange incident for a seasoned knight and master-at-arms. His grandson, Gargan the Guest Coharis, was killed in the Godswood, that is to say, right next to the sole heart tree by the outlaw turned subsequent ruler of Harrenhal, Harren the Red. Understandably, he had a short reign before being hunted down and slain by the orders of King Aenys Targaryen. Rule then went to Lucas Harroway, who was fortunate enough to be elevated to Hand of the King, but unlucky enough to be hurled from a tower in King's Landing. Coincidentally, it was a tower who succeeded him, Walton Towers to be exact, who died from battle wounds 14 days after he became Lord. His son, Jordan Towers, nigh a decade later, died of chest congestion. His own heir, Maegor Towers, sickly and impoverished, occupied only the Tower of Dread, dying childless of said sickness. But not before befriending the next and only good tenant Harrenhal has ever had, Rhaena Targaryen, the widow sister of King Jaehaerys Targaryen, who spent her days peacefully and rather altruistically in Harrenhal, caring for the land and the staff with the grace of a princess. Though not officially from a house that ruled Harrenhal, her time as Lady of the Castle was the closest the fortress came to having a peaceful existence. After her death, lordship passed to House Strong, with Bywin Strong having a rather uneventful and unrecorded tenure there, likely dying on the premises. His son, the aforementioned Lionel Strong, whom some claim is Alys Rivers' father, died in a fire at Harrenhal, along with his son Harwin, while his other son, Larys, had no heirs, leaving the castle once again in need of a ruling house. Enter House Lothston. Lucas I, Lucas II, and Danelle, all of whom were known for their nasty deeds, particularly being accused of placing children in large kettles. None of them lived terribly long, with the house's line ending within half a century of their rule. This was followed by the equally short-lived House Went, also quickly yielding 3 generations of dead lords, culminating in Walter Went, who infamously hosted the tourney at Harrenhal, where Rhaegar Targaryen crowned Lyanna Stark the Queen of Love and Beauty, sparking Robert's Rebellion. Harrenhal was then ruled by his widow, Lady Shella, that is, until Joffrey Baratheon, via Cersei, awarded it to Janis Slynt. Janis never set foot in the castle, but is instead sent to the Wall, where he meets his demise. And, at present, it is Lord Peter Baelish who rules Harrenhal. But will he ever make it there? I want to know what you think. Which tenant had the best, or worst, eviction? And who will be the next person to physically die in Harrenhal? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you have any other characters you'd like me to explore, be sure to let me know. Have you noticed who isn't on this list? Someone who, by the very definition of Harrenhal's curse, should have met her demise. Someone who, if the dubious parentage claims are true, should have been ousted with House Strong. Someone who, against all odds, persists. You see, Alys Rivers isn't affected by the curse, because Alys Rivers is raising the curse. You'll recall that I had said the heart tree at Harrenhal bleeds fresh every spring. Well, a wound does not tend to itself. She has been changing its dressing for centuries. She has been caring for the tree. She has been nursing the curse. Every new lord who arrives at Harrenhal is, in every way that matters, an infant. Ignorant, helpless, entirely unaware of the house's real rules. Rhaena Targaryen learned them. She tended the land, tended the staff, and left peacefully, the only tenant the curse never touched. Everyone else on our ledger failed this lesson. And who, exactly, would have been the one teaching it, if not Alys? She quite literally walked away from the ash that burned her alleged father and sibling, and she survives the Dance of the Dragons, despite having been visited by dragon-riding Targaryens from both the Blacks and the Greens. Something there will not allow her to die. This is best illustrated by Aemond Targaryen, who murdered every member of House Strong who carried a drop of the family's blood. Everyone except Alys, who instead was welcomed into his bed, despite being 30, 50, 400 years his senior. Does this chain of events reek of romance? Or does it exemplify what a wet nurse does best? Convincing something helpless that it is safe in her hands. manipulating a warrior into protecting the castle and its ageless guardian. Bear in mind, when Aemond Targaryen had Harrenhal, he slashed the heart tree 13 times with his sword. So who better to keep around to ensure no harm comes to the true landlord than Daemon's mortal enemy? And by all accounts, Alys's manipulation worked. When Sabbatha Frey came to seize Harrenhal, Alys claimed to be carrying Aemond's child, and thus the prince stayed, continuing to offer his protection. And when the dance continued, and Aemond was forced to leave her side, Alys remained at Harrenhal, unscathed. Even when, years later, the Crown sends forces to remove Alys from Harrenhal, they are stopped by a plague. We know that a couple of decades after the plague, House Lothston took the castle, but there is no record of Alys not being there. No record of her dying at all. And I suspect that if the curse persists, which it clearly has, then the wet nurse must persist too. So, that raises the question, where is she now? But first, if you're enjoying this video, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. It really helps the channel, and a gentleman like me will forever be in your debt. So, where is Alys Rivers? She's still there. During the events of the War of the Five Kings and beyond, Harrenhal has been occupied by the Lannisters, the Brave Companions, Gregor Clegane, Roose Bolton, and there is a small staff who manages to survive this series of brutes and monsters. Of these, Lucan, the blacksmith, and Hara, the serving woman, were killed by Roose Bolton's men. So, there are 3 that survive. Ben Blackthumb and Pretty Pia are both known to have been children at Harrenhal, with Pia being a young girl when Jaime Lannister was in the tourney. And then there is the cook. The nondescript, unnamed yet ever-present cook who isn't said to have been born there, yet wasn't harmed by any of the coups. This, my friends, is Alys Rivers, continuing to nurse the curse. The curse that followed Gregor to his death in the trial by combat. The curse that follows Tywin Lannister to his shameful demise. The curse that watched Vargo Hoat get hacked to pieces on the premises. The curse that will inevitably make Roose Bolton feel his final leech. She has always been there, and she always will be. As long as the heart tree still bleeds, the nurse will be there to tend to it. But Alys Rivers isn't the only wet nurse in Westeros with a mysterious and magical past. There are plenty more to explore. But that is a Tavern Truth for another time. Thank you for lending me your ear tonight. I'll see you in the next tale.